Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming. It's time now for a pretty big one. Season 6, aka Vessel of Hated's launch, is coming. With that, we have big concepts and updates being promised. Just last night, as I make this video, the biggest dev stream happened in which a lot of info was dropped. That huge amount of info came from the stream, but also this mammoth news post by the team on the Blizzard website. Within that news post, then, there's quite a lot of depth and detail we did not get in that more quote-unquote casual live stream. So I'm taking a look at the deeper details and the stats and the numbers to discuss the more important things to know. And with that, everything that they plan to do now may change. They're probably going to change it in the PTR, and they're certainly going to change a lot after the PTR. So everything we look at now isn't concrete. So let's begin. What we do know though is they're going to be going for something called Progression 2.0 as they call it. So our new max level for your character is actually 60. But Paragon points have changed with that in mind. It's a lot to break down, but essentially we have more skill points to work with. All of us, we have more Paragon points than normal, but it means everyone's got more to work with, so that should lead to some pretty interesting changes as a fundamental base of a class. Also, ultimate skills can have more ranks committed to them, like dropping 5 skill points into an ultimate skill, like we would do with a core skill. Still, you can only have one ultimate at a time, so that's still the same limit. Further with Paragon, the points are going to be unlocked per realm, which is a really nice change for alts. It basically means when you earn Paragon points on a character, that's shared across all the characters on that realm, so if you were to make an however far you got with your Paragon, you'll be able to bring those points over straight away. So very nice. Leveling in the Paragon split is still a thing. So 1 to 60 is your leveling time. That means we get those 10 extra skill points to work with in the skill tree. But then 60 to beyond is all about unlocking the Paragon nodes at this point. Also, they mentioned they've overhauled core stats, health, and armor just to give us kind of more information or clearer information so it's easier to understand. But that's what they describe. They don't tell us what they've done really. We can only hope that it's just easier to showcase and talk about. A big part of that Progression 2.0 though is the new difficulty system. They've made a big change to the overall difficulty in that monster levels are no longer really a thing, it's just the enemies are scaled to whatever difficulty you're on at the time. So let's explain that. You can imagine it like the world tiers have changed, or that it's now world tier 1 to 4 and then 5 to 8. This gives us more direct control over the challenge and the rewards we get. We can see normal, hard, expert, and penitent. The harder the difficulty though, you get more gold and more XP, but say penitent's considered much more dangerous than what we've seen before. Penitent will also lead us to the new torment difficulties and beyond, but it is a very familiar system at least initially. We get normal and hard right away, just like world tier 1 and 2, then we get expert after defeating Diablo 4's prologue, so world tier 3 there, then penitent at level 50 is unlocked, so world tier 4. Now it goes beyond that with torment difficulties. As you can see, we have torment levels 1 through 4. These can be considered your endgame options, and we raise this directly through the pit actually, making it more relevant compared to Season 5, where Infernal Hordes kind of really shoved it to the side. The higher level pit clears you achieve then, the higher level of torment you can also activate. In the higher levels of torment, you get better item drops, so it is worth it. As a rough outline, they told us this. Reaching level 60 unlocks the pit, and then tiers 1 to 20 in there. Beating pit tier 20 gets you into torment tier 1. Pit 35 is torment 2, Pit 50 is Torment 3, and finally Pit 65 is Torment 4. So very achievable for your average player, I would say. Naturally though, with better rewards comes better challenge. Though for Torment, we do have this information. Torment 1 is minus 250 armor and minus 25% all resist. Torment 2 is double that. Torment 3 is 750 minus armor and 75% minus all resist, and Torment 4 is 1000 minus armor and 100 minus to all resist. So pretty intense on those stats. It should make managing those a lot more important, or even more important. Next, in terms of progression, then we should talk about the Paragon stuff, starting with a key one, glyphs. At this point in the game, upgrading your glyphs does suck. It's kind of a grindy chore, and they acknowledge that because nightmare dungeons are barely relevant. So they're moving glyph upgrading to the pits to make that content even more valuable, so yet another great change. Apparently we'll get attempts to increase glyph ranks by completing pit tiers rather than set XP. You'll be able to attempt to upgrade a glyph rank, and you'll get up to 3 attempts on average after beating a pit in a normal way, but if you didn't die during it, you get an extra attempt. To make that better, the higher level the pit you clear compared to your glyph level, the bigger the chance it actually upgrades, going all the way to 100% if the pit tier is 10 levels or more above your glyph rank. On top of that, you even get bonus upgrades if the pit tier is way above the glyph level, so when we swap builds and need to level new glyphs, that's going to be really convenient. Even more though, every 20 level difference between pit tier and glyph rank, you get a bonus upgrade attempt. But you know, the glyph ranks are different now. They go all the way to rank 100 compared to being capped at 21 as before. So that's why they're going to rank up way faster. Overall, this ranking up system is definitely a lot more interesting, and hey, tied to relevant content again. Also, extra kind to players who overperform, so that's really good. One extra detail to be aware of is the radius size increase tied to glyphs and their affixes. Apparently at rank 45, so almost halfway, you can upgrade a rare glyph to a legendary one. This will increase the radius from 4 to 5, and it'll get an extra affix. Legendary glyphs seem to be considered a new source of power though, so they should be a big deal, but you know, we haven't learned enough about that to really get into it. We'll see how it works in reality. On the other hand, there's another big side to this, and that's your paragon boards. Each class has one new paragon board to choose, with of course a new legendary node attached to it. However, you can now only equip 5 boards maximum, so you can't be doing your 6, 7 or 8 or more little tricks where you just ignore the board mostly. Having said that, your starting board counts as one as well, so you can only extend into a new board 4 times before reaching the new cap, which is interesting because they're now giving us a new cap of 300 paragon points compared to 200. So these boards are going to be way more filled out compared to before, and I think this is great. It's going to feel a lot more engaging to commit to the boards we use, and that should be standard practice. Now, what you'll find if you scroll all the way to the bottom, or like maybe 60% of the way down to be fair, is the balance update changes. There's general, there's aspect changes. They're trying to make things that are very underused actually be used. Deflecting barrier is a good example where if you've got a barrier active, you have this % chance to ignore damage from specifically distant enemies. But now you have this % chance after taking damage to simply gain a barrier equal to 20% of your max life, and that's doubled when, you know, a distant enemy attacks you. So that's going to be a pretty consistent source of general barrier for all of us. Sounds pretty good. A funny one is the aspect of slaughter. This is one I find myself commonly using as a slow Necromancer, and it used to be 20% movement speed, which is lost for a period of time after you take any damage. But now you get that 20% movement speed and lose the bonus for an amount of time between 2 and 5 seconds after taking damage from a close enemy. So if you're hit by a far enemy, it doesn't stop you. Therefore, this movement speed perk will be going a lot more consistently, and I might end up running it again as Necromancer. We'll see. The Starlight aspect was also changed. It's very underused, that one. You gain a set amount of resource for every 20% life you heal, right? Well, now you gain the same amount of resource for every 20% of life that you heal, or every 200% that you overheal when at max life. So hardcore healers are going to benefit from that quite a bit, and I'm thinking of, say, blood builds on Necromancer that do a lot of overhealing, so that could be pretty damn impactful there. But then for each class, we have a massive amount of changes, from passives to skills, the tempering augments, the paragon with boards as well. So it's a lot to check out, and I would strongly advise you go check out at least your class and have a read through. For me, obviously I'm a Necromancer main, so I can't really comment on whether the passive quick shift and the change here is really going to matter. But for some of the more important stuff for Necromancer that I do play, I'd like to look at Blight. Blight works its way into any shadow build because of its enhancement, the one that increases the damage you deal to those afflicted by Blight. Here we see the basic enhancement version now has an increased radius to Blight rather than providing a slow. I think that is going to be better. We also saw changes to Bloodlance, still very underused in the current state of the game. It's always going to pierce through enemies that are currently lanced as a baseline instead of being tied to the enhancement. Now the enhancement causes the Bloodlance, after being cast 8 times, to be a guaranteed overpower like the additional enhancement ahead of this. So with that in mind, Supernatural's also changed. Now if you take Supernatural, Bloodlance deals 50% times increased critical strike damage and 15% times increased overpower damage. So this is a pretty major buff to the baseline Bloodlance works and the stacking effect of that. And then with Supernatural, the raw output that it has. They're also doing other stuff to Blood, though I'm not massively sure about it. Blood Wave has been reworked, at least the prime one. Instead of being a slow, it'll generate a 20% DR, which is certainly nice, but is it enough to give up other things like Bone Storm? But here's a funny one in regards to Blood Wave. They've made it so that it deals additional damage instead of reduced damage and, you know, minimizing that effect. Blood Wave is just something that no one's really used much outside of fun and trying it for the whole duration of the history of the game. Making it actually deal damage and increasing that now with Tidal Aspect is interesting. Obviously they want us to try some Bloodlands and Blood stuff again, but I still feel like it needs more. One unique that's got a major increase for the whole Corpse Explosion or Bombardier classic build is obviously Black River. They took away the intelligence affix and put on this chance for Corpse Explosion to deal double damage. That's insane for that build. So if Shadow's coming back, Corpse Explosion should be back, and Black River could be an incredible pick for this affix change. Something I did see across the board for Paragons, not just Necromancer, is changes to certain nodes, right? So here on the Bone Graph board, we have Erudite, which previously gave us max life and armor, right? Now it's giving us resistance to all elements and max life. Armor we found we over cap on, we reached the cap on easily. With the changes to difficulty in the higher tiers being a massive minus 100% to your all element resist, we're gonna need more sources of resistance to all elements. So I do think we're gonna find a lot of that in the Paragon, it would seem. But yes, strongly recommend you check out the patch notes for your class and have a look what's changed. Okay, speaking of new sort of sources of power, rune words. This is the big thing coming in Season 6. They claim we're going to use these to create our own abilities, but you know, it's a lot less complicated than that might sound. You cut them up into two types: ritual runes and invocation runes. Rituals specify actions to trigger, while invocations are basically what happens when you trigger them. So ritual setup, invocation spend. Not complicated. The example they gave was back. This ritual rune just has a simple condition: move 5 meters. Then the invocation example was Ja, which replaces the next evade with a teleport like you're a sorcerer, causing you to blink a distance instead of evade, but also deal damage and even become unstoppable. Absolutely incredible. As a Necromancer main, this source of unstoppable that doesn't CC me like Blood Mist and gives me mobility at the same time is very exciting. Further, we've also learned that runes are going to come in different rarities based on, you know, their potency, magic, rare, and legendary, a familiar system. Naturally though, there's going to be systems to manage this so it's not freeform and OP. They limit it using a resource system they're calling offering. Ritual runes then generate offering resource, and invocations are the things you spend it on. Naturally, the stronger the invocation, the more offering, the more resource it needs. However, as a cool addition, it added something to this called overflow. Overflow is when you have more resource than you needed to generate that invocation. So in exchange, they're going to make the overflow of the resource that you had apply a little bonus to the invocation when you use it. It might even be worth it to stack up your offering resource so that your invocation is overflowed when you do use it. The example they gave us to help understand that was this. Back generates 50 offering every 5 meters you walk. So how much offering do you need to trigger that teleport? As it turns out, it needs 500 offering. Therefore, we need to walk a reasonable distance before the teleport becomes available, compared to, I don't know, literally just 5 meters, which is fair and kind of expected. Anyway, to make these rune words actually work, you need to socket them as a ritual rune and invocation rune into any item with 2 sockets. So before that'd be chest piece, leg piece, a 2-handed weapon as obvious examples, but they've also changed the slots in general to prep for this system. So helms, they also have 2 slots now compared to before. We'll see what else they've done. Now that's how they work. How do you get them? Well, we know of 2 ways. Kill monsters and you'll see them drop, or you can craft them. They revealed the rune crafting system a little bit. You craft runes using runes, so 3 runes of the same name can be spent to craft a different one. When non-legendary runes are used in crafting, it also has a chance to generate a rune of higher rarity, which is quite nice. Amazingly though, they're going to let us use runes to maybe generate Mythic Uniques. So with 1 Resplendent Spark and 10 legendary runes, 10 rares, and 10 magics, all of 1 specific name, you can spend that to craft a mythic. That is crazy. Meaning with just 1 spark, you could craft a mythic instead of needing 4 like normal. That is, of course, if you have all the other runes you need, which is not going to be a common or fast thing, but another way to do it is welcome. But now for the real deeper dive part, let's consider the fact that there's 45 new runes that they're adding to the game. 17 of those are ritual runes to generate offering, while the rest are all invocation runes. Let's run down the list of ritual runes. So these are the ones that you do to build up offering, right? One of them is just cast any skill with a cooldown. Another could be casting a non-channeled skill 3 times in a row. A lucky hit chance when you're hitting injured enemies. Don't take damage for 5 seconds and deal some of your own. Casting core skills that are channeled. Evoking power from a different class, casting ultimates, becoming injured or CC'd yourself, inflicting CC, simply casting evade, or traveling as we saw. Your minion or companion gets a kill or even dies. When you drink a health potion, spending an amount of max resource, casting a skill after moving, when you lose certain amounts of health, or just standing still. So there's going to be a lot of ways you can generate offering, but what we care about is what you can do when you spend it. So we have Lack, invoking Barbarian's challenging shout, reducing your damage taken. Or Warcry from Barbarian, increasing your movement speed and damage dealt. What you're going to see is any of these are giving us different skills from different classes. Vex means we gain +3 to all skills for 5 seconds though, so there's plenty of general stuff too, like Gar, gain 2.5% critical strike chance for 5 seconds, stacking up to 25%. Amazing for crit builds like Bone Spirit. Speaking of which, Zan, legendary, your next skill cast will be a guaranteed critical strike and overpower. Amazing for any build that wants to hit hard in one hit, like Barbarians, like Bone Spirit, Necromancer. There are more class stuff though. There's one that evokes Druid's Earthen Bulwark, the Massive Barrier, or Petrify, which stuns enemies, increases your crit strike damage against them. We see more general ones like reduce your active cooldowns by a bit, or give you some primary resource, get an evade charge back, and gain movement speed up to 30% for 5 seconds. Big defensives like gain max life, or more class stuff like Necromancers, Decrepify, slowing enemies, reducing damage, letting you execute them. There's also Iron Maiden, so counterattack damage from enemies and heal you when they die. Decrepify probably the best there. There's one where non-basic skill casts give you primary resource to deal increased damage, or reduce your ultimate cooldown. For rogues, we get rogues countering concealment, gaining dodge and movement speed, unstoppable and stealth. That's crazy. Or Mott, where we gain a shadow from the rogue's dark shroud, reducing damage taken per shadow. So a bit of mitigation for everyone. In regards to Sorcerer, we can replace the evade for the teleport as we saw. But another one is evoke the mystical Frost Nova, inflicting freeze and vulnerable onto enemies. So what you're hearing is you're not just getting other skills from different classes, but you're getting enhanced versions of them. There's ones coming from the Spiritborn too. Evoke the Spiritborn's concussive stomp, dealing damage and knocking down enemies. Or the Vortex, dealing damage and pulling enemies in, which is going to be exciting for most classes. Barbarians is Earthquake, dealing damage to enemies within. Druids is Dancing Bolts, seeking and dealing damage to enemies. Necromancers is Desecrated Ground, dealing damage to enemies within. Hopefully, they've changed Desecrated Ground to actually stack, but we'll see. For Rogues, it's generating stun grenades for a hard stun and extra damage. And Sorcerer, it's generating meteorites, dealing damage to enemies. And a new one for Spiritborn is Pestilent Swarm, dealing more damage to enemies. All of that's amazing. There's an absolute ton of them, but getting all of them and crafting them is going to be a process, right? Well, it turns out they're going to be tradable. Turns out they stack, so they get to go into a new socketable inventory tab, so they're not going to mess with that inventory. A maximum of 2 rune words can be equipped at once, so that's 4 runes total. And the same rune cannot be equipped twice as important limiters. But the fact they're tradable means if you find something you've already got and your friend really needs that, you can trade them. So getting the things we need shouldn't be too nightmarish. So yeah, a lot to consider there. I hope they balance it well. It's definitely going to be tough. I also did mention that they're going to be involving Mythic Unique crafting via runes though. So it's good to know that there's going to be 3 new Mythic Uniques in Season 6. There's Era Perdition, a Mythic Unique Helm. Its affixes are 200% damage to angels and demons, which is interesting as an inherent, but then you got 20% crit strike chance, lucky hit chance, movement speed, and +2 to core skills, reminding me of Sheko's. Its power though is to succumb to hatred to generate Mother's Favor, increasing your damage dealt by 60% times, and you generate this effect by slaughtering enemies in general. It says steal Mother's Favor from nearby allies though, so I wonder whether that's going to have a negative to them. Then we have the Shroud of the False Death, a chess piece. Its inherent is +1 to all passives, which is incredible, but then its affixes are 111 all stats, 222 max life, and 333% damage on the next attack after entering stealth. Also 11.1% resource gen. They like these weird numbers. So if you haven't attacked in the last 2 seconds while wearing this, you gain stealth and 40% flat movement speed. Pretty cool. But obviously if you're using the rune that involves stealth, or you're just, I don't know, a rogue with stealth, maybe you can generate that effect more consistently. Lastly, there's Shattered Vow, which is a Mythic Unique polearm. Its inherent affix is +400% damage to healthy enemies, so great for burst. It gives max life, attack speed while berserking, and then extra damage over time. So that sounds like shadow damage over time Necromancer, or bleed for example, or poison. It has this lucky hit chance to become berserking, right? And then the power is execute enemies afflicted by more damage over time than remaining life. So if you can stack up that dot really hard, you can instantly kill enemies. And it doesn't say anything about doesn't work on bosses. So yeah, that one's going to be really interesting to check out. Also, I want you to be aware of the item quality rework that's happening. Item power is going to be capped at 800, down from 925. Sacreds and Ancestrals have been redesigned. They're not what we knew them as. For example, Ancestral items are much more special drops and are much more powerful because of it. They won't drop though until we're into that new difficulty modifier, Torment 1 as a minimum. Though they always drop at item power 800, which is nice, and greater affixes in general only found on these new Ancestrals, but they're always going to have at least one greater affix as an item type, so yeah, swings and roundabouts. Meanwhile, Sacreds are just gone. Non-ancestral items are capped at power level 750, 50 lower than Ancestrals, but you know, legendaries that drop when you're 60, they're always going to be max eye level at 750. So I think the new item quality system is going to feel more impactful and special, and also easier to understand. It's just an item that's normal, or it's an ancestral item, which is more of a big deal. Okay, so last topic is the massive one to consider that we're not going to be able to get to everything on. New class skills, passives, new aspects, temper recipes, more to consider for everyone, and a big wall of rebalancing. All of that's going to be tested in the PTR and massively changed after. So I wouldn't worry too much about it, but it is interesting to look at. Here's just some highlights. In terms of new skills, Barbarians get a new Pulse AoE and Mighty Throw. Druid gets Stone Burst, which is kind of a channeled out AoE. Necromancer has Soul Rift, which is more interesting than the others because it's a new ultimate skill. You deal damage and sap the souls of enemies, generating essence and a barrier. Enhancements make this increased damage after use of the ultimate. The more souls you steal though, the better. And it's a source of vulnerable, super cool. Rogue gets Dance of Knives though, a normal ability, a channel skill where you're sending these knives out around you, making you faster, more evasive, and even potentially stun enemies with grenades. Lastly, Sorcerer has Familiar, a new summon skill that lets you spawn an element of the last element you used, and you can have up to 6 of these going at once, which sounds pretty cool. Between those, I think Necromancer with a new ultimate skill is the most interesting, but will it be good enough to work in proper builds instead of just Bone Storm being the best generally every time? On the other hand though, we do have new passives for each class. There's a lot to consider there, but let's just talk about the new key passives that everyone gets. Barbarian gets Barbed Carapace, generating thorns as you spend Fury. If you cast a cooldown skill, you become unhindered, and then deal 100% of your thorns as physical damage to close enemies every second. So yeah, they're enhancing thorn builds for Barbarians in Season 6. Druid, by comparison, gets one with nature, and that's tied to companions to try to make them work. Companion skills get an extra companion and deal 50% times increased damage, and you also gain the passives of Ravens, Wolves, and Poison Creeper all at once, so yeah, maybe good. Necromancer gets Affliction. Enemies affected by Vulnerable, CC, shadow damage over time. These targets get inflicted by Affliction, taking 15% times increased damage from you and minions, and then Curse skills start to deal weapon damage in the form of Shadow. That increases based on the damage you've done to afflicted targets. So pretty interesting as an alternative pick. Maybe we'll get to use that in Season 6, we'll see. Rogue gets Alchemical Admixture. Dealing 3 different types of non-physical damage increases the power of your imbuement skills. You can push that further by bonus damage to Poison, Shadow, and Cold. So yes, all about the elemental style stuff for Rogue. Lastly, Sorcerer gets Enlightenment. Casting skills grants stacks of this, and when at 100, you become enlightened. During that, your bonus damage with Fire, Lightning, and Cold are equal to them combined, so great to stack up all of them. And then while enlightened, you also get 25% times more damage, 45% plus to mana regen, and 20% plus to attack speed. On paper, I think that sounds insane. But yeah, that is so much to discuss and highlight. Hopefully this gives you the detail, the key points to consider, lots to test and work out. And again, it's all going to change after the PTR anyway. On paper though, I'm excited by the changes and the big updates to different core systems. Hopefully it feels good to play. Until next time then, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thank you for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.